Willa of the Wood, Chapter 15. "Come here, child," her grandmother whispered softly in the old language as Willa walked into their den. Her mama was a small, crumpled-up creature, unable to stand or walk, but Willa went to her immediately and wrapped her arms around her, knowing that she wasn't nearly as frail as she appeared. Her grandmother was 137 years old, one of the oldest Farron in the clan, and one of the last remaining old-time wood witches. She had the most beautiful dark skin, marbled with streaks of brown, black, and white, and she was heavily spotted around her cheeks and her eyes. Her skin was wrinkled and textured, not just with age, but years of weaving into the surroundings. The strands of her long, finely braided hair were mostly black, but intertwined with gray, brown, red, and gold, as if she had inside her the essence of every person who ever lived. "Where have you been tonight?" her mama asked gently, the edges of her voice frayed with love and relief and admonishment all at the same time. "I'm sorry. I was trying, but I couldn't get home, Mama," Willa whispered in the old words as she held her. She and her mama always spoke in the Farron language when they were alone within the smooth, curving stone walls of their den, but they were careful never to speak it in front of the other members of the clan. The Padawan had forbidden the use of the old language decades before Willa was born, insisting that everyone learn the way of the Dayfolk for the survival of the lair. But Farron was the first language Willa had learned to speak from her parents and grandparents at home. The English words and some of the Cherokee words that came to her ears later in her life had always been a struggle for her, always twisting on her tongue, which had made it more difficult to fit in with all the other Jedders. "You're hurt," her mama said as her small trembling hands passed over Willa's body. "Lie down here," she whispered, patting the area beside her, and Willa immediately complied, laying herself in the cocoon of soft woven river cane that hung from the ceilings by vines. When most of the members of the clan looked at her grandmother, they saw a decrepit old woman who couldn't walk. But Willa knew her grandmother had once been a distant wayfarer of the mountains, a consummate weaver who could disappear into any background in an instant, and a friend to many of the most sacred animals of the forest. She carried the lore of the forest inside her, in her old body, in her mind, in her dreaming soul, and Willa had always been as greedy for that knowledge as a sapling was for light. When her grandmother had told long, winding stories of the past, the other members of the clan, especially the young Jedders, turned away in boredom or even scoffed at her, but Willa wanted to hear her mama's stories. She wanted to be able to do what her mama had once done. She wanted to know what her mama knew. But as Willa grew from sapling into tree, becoming stronger and stronger in her forest skills, her mama became weaker and weaker, her body sinking down to the ground like an old willow tree whose branches had become too weak for it to carry. Most of the members of the clan ate the food that the foragers brought into the lair for them. But her mama had always foraged for her own food. When her mama could no longer go out into the forest and gather her own food, Willa went out and gathered it for her. When her mama lost the use of her legs, Willa made her a sling of woven reeds to keep her upright. When her mama's hands trembled, Willa steadied them in her own. "Tell me what happened to you," her grandmother said as she examined Willa's wounds. But Willa went quiet. Her mama had told her many times how dangerous the Dayfolk could be. "I know the Padawan expects you to steal from them," her mama had told her when she was 10. "But when you hear them coming, you must run. When you see them, you must hide. They are not of this world, so promise me that you will not go near them." The last thing Willa wanted to do now was to tell her mama where she'd gone and what she'd done. She lay like an injured fawn, curled up quietly as her grandmother worked on her wounds. Needing supplies, her mama used the strength of her arms to drag herself over to a small niche in the stone wall, where light filtered down through the round holes in the ceiling onto a number of leafy plants and small trees she had planted there years before. She had been caring for the plants ever since. As she approached them, the plants reached upward, not just toward the light of the sun, but to her nurturing hands and her murmuring voice, moving back and forth between her open fingers as if the leaves were being caressed by a gentle breeze. One of the plants was a miniature tree growing out of a small stone bowl. It had fine tendrils of roots growing into the dirt, a bent little trunk, and a spread of delicate branches above that were covered in tiny bright green leaves. "Thank you, my friend," her mama whispered as she carefully picked a single leaf from the tree and brought it over to Willa. Willa had known this little tree all her life and had spoken with it many times. It had always been one of her closest friends. Her mama had told her that although it was small, this tree was more than 600 years old and in some ways more powerful than the entirety of the layer above. She said that she'd been protecting it, hiding it, keeping it small, until one day it could come out into the light of the world and grow up into what it was meant to be. Her mama put the tiny leaf into her own mouth for a moment, then brought it out again, crushed it between her fingers, and began to apply it bit by bit to Willa's wounds. The pain of the wound immediately began to subside. The lake of the bears had staunched the bleeding and saved her life, but now her mama continued the healing process. This one room, this little den where she had grown up with her mama since her parents and sister died, was her protected place, her home. It was the one place that the outside world never came. It was the only place where she had ever felt truly safe, and the only place she had ever felt truly loved. But halfway through her work, her mama paused. Willa heard the sigh of her breath as she exhaled. Willa winced a little as her grandmother's fingers pried carefully into the wound and pulled out a tiny piece of metal the size of a small pebble. It was a piece of lead shot. Her grandmother frowned. "Willa," she said, "you must help me understand this. What am I seeing here? How were you hurt? Is there something you're not telling me?"